The shop was barely visible in the dense fog that clung to the city streets. It sat at the end of a winding alley, its window a dusty haze of forgotten time. A rusted sign creaked above the door, swaying on chains. Curios and curiosities. Something about the place seemed to pull at me, though I couldn't have said why. I didn't even know it was there until that evening, when the whisper of a breeze carried a faint, melodic chime to my ears. It sounded almost like a voice. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and varnished wood. Every inch of space was crammed with objects, tarnished candlesticks, faded books, peculiar trinkets whose purposes were lost to time. The dim light of a single bulb hung over the counter, casting long shadows that twisted with every flicker. Looking for something specific? The voice startled me. From behind the counter, a wiry man emerged. His face was gaunt, with sharp angles that made him seem both ancient and ageless. His pale eyes fixed on me with unsettling precision, as though he knew why I had come before I did. "I'm not sure," I replied, suddenly unsure of myself. "Just browsing." "Ah," he said, with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll find what you need." I didn't understand what he meant, but I nodded politely and turned my attention to the shelves. My fingers brushed against a row of porcelain figurines, their cracked faces peering at me like trapped spirits. Then I saw it, a small key, nestled on a velvet cushion. It was no bigger than my thumb, made of blackened brass, and covered in tiny, intricate etchings that seemed to shimmer in the weak light. "How much for this?" I asked, holding it up. The shopkeeper's smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp for comfort. "That one? A mere trifle. Take it. Consider it a gift." I hesitated. There was something unspoken in his tone, but before I could refuse, he wrapped it in a scrap of paper and pressed it into my hand. "It's meant for you," he said softly. "Don't lose it." As I left the shop, the key seemed heavier than it should have been, its cold weight pressing into my palm. The fog had thickened, muffling the sounds of the city, and for a moment, I felt entirely alone. That night, I placed the key on my nightstand and crawled into bed, hoping for sleep. But as the hours dragged on, I felt it, an unease creeping into the room. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, the dark corners of the room swallowing the moonlight. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, too quiet to make out, yet impossible to ignore. I turned to the nightstand. The key gleamed faintly, though no light reached it. And for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a shadow near the door, a figure standing motionless, its outline blurred as though it didn't fully belong to this world. I didn't sleep that night. The key's purpose revealed itself 2 days later. I'd all but forgotten about the cabinet in my study, a tall, weathered piece of furniture left by the previous tenant. Its lock had been rusted shut for as long as I'd lived there, its contents sealed away. But now, as I examined it, the key felt warm in my hand, as though eager to be used. The lock turned with a soft click, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the room. The door creaked open, revealing shelves lined with yellowed papers and trinkets. At the center was a mirror. It was small, no larger than my hand, with an ornate frame of tarnished silver. The glass was cloudy, its surface marred by faint scratches. Yet as I stared into it, something stirred within the reflection, something not my own. The longer I looked, the more certain I became that the images weren't mine. A cobblestone street, slick with rain. A woman in a long coat walking quickly, her face obscured. And then, a room lit by flickering candlelight, filled with the sound of voices I couldn't hear. I blinked and pulled back, my heart racing. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my face, pale and drawn. That night the dreams began. They were fragmented and strange, filled with places I'd never been and people I didn't know. In one dream, I was standing on the cobblestone street from the mirror, the rain soaking through my clothes as the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned, but no one was there. I woke drenched in sweat, the mirror sitting on my desk, its surface glinting in the faint morning light. I told myself it was just a coincidence, just an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next few days, the mirror's visions became clearer. I saw faces, strangers who felt oddly familiar, and places that seemed to hum with a presence just beyond comprehension. Each time, the sense of wrongness grew, as though the mirror was trying to show me something but couldn't. Then, one evening, as I stared into the glass, the whispering returned. This time, it was louder, insistent, as though it was coming from within the mirror itself. Words began to form, faint and broken. Find them. The glass clouded, the surface rippling like disturbed water. And for the first time, I felt the weight of the mirror's secret pressing down on me. It wasn't just a relic, it was a window. And something on the other side was watching. The whispering became a companion in the days that followed. It was subtle at first, a faint murmur in the quiet of my apartment, but it grew persistent. I began to dread the stillness of night, when the sound would swell, wrapping around me like an unseen presence. Then came the estate sale. I hadn't planned to attend, it wasn't my sort of thing, but something about the flyer I'd found in my mailbox drew me in. It was printed on thick, yellowed paper, and the address was unfamiliar. Still, I found myself standing at the gates of an old mansion on the outskirts of town, its Gothic spires clawing at the overcast sky. The interior was suffused with a sense of decay. Faded tapestries hung on walls, and the air carried the weight of mildew and forgotten years. The items on display were varied: cracked porcelain dolls, tarnished silverware, and stacks of dusty books that promised secrets long buried. But my attention was drawn to a small table near the corner of the room. There, amid a clutter of trinkets, sat a locket. It was made of silver, its surface etched with intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift under the dim light. The chain was fine, delicate, yet impossibly sturdy. I didn't know why I picked it up. Perhaps it was the way it seemed to call to me, or the faint hum I felt in my fingertips as they brushed against the metal. Either way, I handed over a few bills and slipped the locket into my pocket. That night, as I sat at my desk, the locket began to whisper. The voice was faint, melodic, and undeniably feminine. It wasn't speaking in words, but in a tone that conveyed urgency, as though it were trying to communicate something just out of reach. I opened the locket, revealing a faded photograph of a woman. Her face was delicate, framed by dark curls, and her eyes seemed to meet mine with an intensity that sent a shiver through me. As the days passed, the whispers grew stronger. They began to form fragments of words, faint but distinct. Help, follow, find. At first, I thought they were meaningless, but they soon aligned with the visions in the mirror. The woman in the photograph began to appear. At first, she was a fleeting presence, reflections in windows or shadows that disappeared when I turned. But soon, her image lingered, and the whispers became clearer. She was leading me, pointing me towards something. I followed. The locket's whispers guided me to places I'd never been: an abandoned church on the edge of town where the wind carried echoes of hymns long silenced, a crumbling library where forgotten records revealed names that meant nothing to me but felt significant. At each place, I found fragments, old letters, photographs, trinkets, all tied to the woman in the locket. Her name was Eleanor, and she had vanished, leaving only whispers and shadows in her wake. But as I delved deeper, The whispers changed. They became layered, as though more than one voice was speaking. The new voices were darker, carrying an edge of malice that chilled me. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to stumble into its snare. The letter arrived one morning, slipped under my door in an envelope of heavy embossed paper. The handwriting was elegant, the ink a deep, glistening black. It read, "To the holder of the relics, your journey has not gone unnoticed. You seek truths buried in shadow, but the answers are not yours alone to claim. Join me at the manor of Asphodel, where the echoes of what was linger still." The collector. The name sent a chill through me. I'd read it before, in the fragments Eleanor had led me to. The collector was a name whispered in hushed tones, a figure who had once been human, but had long since transcended mortality through the hoarding of objects imbued with lives and memories. Despite the unease that gripped me, I knew I had to go. The manor of Asphodel stood at the edge of a forest, its silhouette looming against the twilight sky. The path to the front door was lined with statues whose faces were worn smooth by time, their eyeless gazes fixed on the horizon. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing a grand, dimly lit hall. "Welcome," came a voice, smooth and resonant. The collector emerged from the shadows, tall and clad in garments that seemed woven from the night itself. Their face was obscured by a mask, its surface adorned with the same swirling patterns as the locket and key. "I've been expecting you," they said, their voice carrying a gravity that seemed to make the air heavier. The collector led me through the manor, each room filled with relics that radiated an unnatural energy. They stopped before a table, upon which lay the objects I had gathered: the key, the mirror, and the locket. "These are not mere artifacts," they explained. "They are echoes, fragments of lives stolen, their essence trapped within. Each relic you've claimed has led you closer to the truth, but you must tread carefully. To hold such power is to invite their past into your present." I wanted to ask who they were, what they wanted, but the words stuck in my throat. The collector reached out, their gloved hand brushing against the locket. "Eleanor speaks to you, doesn't she? She is not the first, nor will she be the last. The echoes you follow will either guide you to salvation or lead you into the same fate as those who came before." "What is the truth?" I asked, my voice trembling. The collector turned, their mask glinting faintly in the light. "The truth," they said, "is that every relic comes at a cost, and you have already paid more than you realize." The room seemed to darken, the relics pulsing faintly as though alive. "You have one more relic to find," the collector said, "and when you do, the choice will be yours, to break the cycle or become a part of it." With that, the collector vanished, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of the manor, the relics gleaming faintly in the dim light. The collector's words lingered in my mind, as heavy and unrelenting as the relics themselves. A final key to find, they had said. One last echo to uncover before the truth would be revealed. Yet even as I returned to my apartment, I felt the air around me tighten with an unspoken dread. The whispers from the locket had grown silent, and the mirror's visions were murky and indistinct, as though something, or someone, was obscuring them. It was late that night when I found it, the letter tucked inside the drawer of my desk. I hadn't placed it there, I was sure of that. The paper was thin and brittle, its edges charred, as though it had barely escaped a fire. Written in the same elegant script as the collector's note, it contained only an address and a warning. Do not open the door unless you are prepared to face what waits within. I knew better than to ignore it. The address led me to a narrow alley in a part of the city I didn't recognize. The buildings here were dark and weathered, their windows gaping like hollow eyes. At the end of the alley stood a door, its surface warped and splintered with age. A faint, otherworldly glow seeped from beneath it, pulsing in time with a sound I could barely hear, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to thrum inside my chest. I hesitated, the weight of the relics in my bag grounding me. My hand trembled as I turned the knob, the door creaking open to reveal a small, circular room. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The walls were lined with shelves, each one holding objects that exuded a faint, unearthly light. At the center of the room, on a pedestal of black stone, was the key. It was unlike the first key. This one was silver, its surface polished to a mirror-like finish. But etched into its surface were runes that shimmered faintly, like ripples on water. The moment I touched it, the hum grew louder, resonating through my bones. The room shifted. The walls seemed to breathe, the shelves warping as though they were alive. The relics began to pulse in unison, their lights flickering and dimming. And then, in the corner of the room, a shadow stirred. It wasn't just a shadow, it was something else entirely. Its form was indistinct, shifting like smoke, yet it carried a weight that made the air thick and oppressive. Two faint lights gleamed where its eyes should have been, and as it moved toward me, the hum rose to a deafening crescendo. "You should not be here," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers layered atop one another. I clutched the key tightly, my heart racing. I was sent. By the collector. The shadow paused, its form rippling as though in thought. "The collector has always sought to break the cycle," it murmured. "But the cycle is not theirs to break. It is yours." "What cycle?" I asked, my voice shaking. The shadow seemed to grow darker, its presence filling the room. "The echoes you have gathered are fragments of those who sought power, those who thought they could escape their pasts by imprisoning it. But the relics remember. They always remember." It gestured toward the key in my hand. "That is the final piece. With it, you hold the choice, to release the echoes and break the chain, or to become the next guardian." "Guardian," I repeated, my breath shallow. The shadow moved closer, its voice soft but insistent. "To hold the relics is to hold their weight forever, to guard them from those who would misuse them. To remain, as the collector does, trapped between life and eternity." I stepped back, the key cold against my palm. The weight of its words pressed down on me like a physical force. The relics in my bag seemed to grow heavier, their whispers rising once more in a chaotic symphony of pleas and warnings. "What happens if I release them?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The shadow stilled. "They will return to the lives they were stolen from. Their echoes will fade, and the relics will be no more. But it will come at a cost." "What cost?" I demanded, desperation creeping into my voice. "You will forget," it said simply. "The relics, their whispers, and the truths they revealed. You will lose the knowledge you have gained, but the cycle will end." I stared at the key, the runes shimmering faintly as though alive. The choice was mine to make, but neither path felt like salvation. To release the relics meant losing everything I had uncovered, erasing the strange and terrible journey that had brought me here. To keep them meant binding myself to them, becoming another link in a chain of shadows and whispers. The hum grew louder, the room pulsing with the weight of my decision. My grip tightened on the key as I took a deep breath, the relic's whispers rising to a crescendo. And then I made my choice. When I emerged from the alley, the city seemed brighter, its edges sharper and more vivid than I remembered. The bag was gone, and so was the weight in my chest. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, like a dream I couldn't quite recall. In the distance, the shop with the creaking sign stood, its door slightly ajar. I paused, a faint echo tugging at the edge of my memory.